Welcome to the NT Podkast, Science and Theology podcast. I'm Nemanja Jurišić, and today we are honored to have with us Professor Yosef Garfinkel, or in Serbian we would say Yosif, a leading Israeli archaeologist renowned for his extensive work on biblical era sites such as Khirbet Qeiyafa, Tel Ali, and Khirbet Qeiyafa. So his excavations have significantly contributed to our understanding of the early kingdom of Judah and the historical context of the Hebrew Bible. So Professor Garfinkel, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing very well. As a matter of fact, I'm in the last 2 weeks, I'm excavating in Jerusalem, so you can add another site to the list that you just mentioned.
Amazing. And can you, for the beginning, say something about your current projects and what are the latest discoveries from the Holy Land? We want to know what is the most attractive now. Yeah.
In Jerusalem, I think it's a bit too early to give conclusions, but basically we are working in the Ophel area where Dr. Eilat Mazar excavated a gate and remains from the First Temple period. Many of these remains were covered by later remains from the Hellenistic and Herodian and Byzantine walls and structures. And what we are doing, we dismantle basically 5-6 walls in order to have a full exposure of the Iron Age. And the next phase will be conservation and restoration. So when people will come to these areas, they will have just the Iron Age in this specific part of the Ophel in Jerusalem. By the way, the Ophel itself is about 30 dunam, and we are talking about half dunam. But this is the only place where you have remains from the First Temple. Later, people can continue, and then they can see remain from the Hashmonean era, and later from Herodian period, and then Byzantine, and even the Islamic. But Iron Age can be seen only in this specific small part of the area.
Wow, amazing. Thank you for sharing this. I'm excited to see publication and whatever it would be. So let's go back into history. Can you tell us about Neolithic period? You wrote many articles about that in the region of Israel. How the life generally looked like during that period?
You can't speak about the Neolithic period in general. There are different sub-period and there are differences between sites. But I think that the major change in the Neolithic period is the transition from hunter-gatherer economy to agriculture. And in the Neolithic people start settled in permanent villages, and they started to cultivate land and to domesticate animal. And this is a major change in human behavior. Instead of depending on nature, people start in an active way to produce food. And we can see that in the beginning, the villages were, or the average villages were smaller. So it's small community, maybe 50, 100 people live together in the beginning. But slowly over time, you can see that the villages became bigger and bigger. I excavated a site called Sha'ar Hagolan, and this was a site of 200 dunams. Dunam is 1,000 square meters. So in a site like this, maybe 5,000 people lived together. So it's a major change in human evolution, creating such large communities. And you can see that the people of Sha'ar Hagolan invented new type of architecture. They have courtyard houses. That means that 4 or 5 nuclear families live together around the courtyard. This was not found before. Before, the open area in the village was between houses. But when you have a courtyard, you take part of the open area and it became part of the private property of the people who lived inside. And then, because you cannot just go in the village as you like, we have streets. We have the earliest, or among the earliest streets in the world were found in Sha'ar Hagolan. So you can see that because you have large people living together, it's affecting the social organization and affecting how people relating to each other. And these are stages that eventually led into urbanism. And in urbanism, you can have 10,000 people living together. And today in big cities, maybe 20 million people living together. But the Neolithic people started this process.
Yes, very exciting. Thank you for sharing this also. So you wrote also about origin of dance. So how long ago did people begin to dance as a means of expression? Yeah.
I don't know exactly when they started. It can be 1 million years ago or might be 500,000 years ago. The point is that when you look at, if you believe in evolution, and you look at the great apes like chimpanzees or orangutans, they are not dancing. So why people are dancing? This is not something that they inherited from earlier generation or from earlier fathers or forefathers. So it's something that people had to invent in a certain stage of the evolution. And I think that there are 5 phases in the evolution of human dance. And these phases did not replace each other. They have been accumulated one on top of the other. And I think that the first phase was for mating, male and female, and you can start romantic relations by dancing. Even today, people go to dance in weekend, and after the dance, they're probably making sex at home. So this is part, the dance is very strongly associated with temptation and seduction. So I think this is the first phase, and it was already said by Darwin more than 130 years ago. But some anthropologists don't accept it and they have other opinions. But I think that this is the first phase. Then about 100,000 years ago, we have the earliest burials. And burials is already what we call rite of passage. That people, almost every community have 4 major rite of passage. When somebody born, when somebody joining the elder community, marriage, and finally death. And you have burial. So this is 4 phases in the evolution of or in the development of every person. And the community is celebrating this event. Now, if you look at the earliest burials, they're about 100,000 years ago in Mount Carmel and even near Nazareth in Kafze cave. Some people even dating them to 120,000 years or even a bit older. What do you find in this burial? In these burials, you have red ochre, red pigment on the bones or in the sides, and also seashells. So people already decorated themselves. And you can see in an anthropological observations that in rite of passage, people are dancing. So I think that this happened already about 100,000 years ago. This is rite of passage, and this is for creating bonding, social bonding. As I said, some anthropologists started dancing with social bonding, but then they cannot understand the strong sexual aspect of dancing, which is done on the individual level. So I think it started from the individual and moved into the community. Then about 40,000 years ago, we can see the beginning of art and clear musical instrument like flutes. And I think that this is the beginning of shamanism. And this is when somebody heal is go to the shaman makes ceremonies and dancing and get into trance. And I think that this is the beginning of trance dance. We can also see in this period in cave very imaginary figures. Like you have the lion man, a statue of a man 30 centimeters high with the head of a lion. I think that this is where healing started and healing ceremonies and shamanism. About 10,000 years ago, beginning of agriculture that we already mentioned, there is a need for calendrical rituals. Before, people danced because of mating or because of married or because somebody died or because somebody was ill and he needed healing. But calendrical rituals is coordinating the agricultural activity. And in Mediterranean climatic zone, you need to sow the land at autumn, and you need to harvest the barley in Passover. Now we are in Passover. And then you need to harvest the wheat in Shavuot, about a month and a half later. And how do you coordinate the society to do the agricultural activities on the right time? By holidays. You have calendrical rituals, people coming and dancing, Okay, in Judaism, people make pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to the temple, and then they came back to the village. And what did they do? They start doing the agricultural process that was needed in this specific time. So this is what I'm calling calendrical rituals. The fourth phase, and the last phase is the professional dancer. With urbanism, you have people who can be professional dancers, and of course today the ballet dance is the most prestige and required a lot of training. But you can already see in ancient Egyptian wall painting 4,500 years ago. You can see a band of dancers standing on one leg, and the other leg is like spagat in the air. This is very complicated body gesture that you need to adjust yourself. And if you have a group of 6, 7, 8 people doing it together, it's already a band. So people need time to exercise to get in such a high level of performing. So this is, I think, the last phase of dancing in human evolution.
Yes, very interesting area to research. I think there is found that Neanderthals have flutes as instruments and use them. Is it true or?
The flute, they were found in Germany in caves near in the Swabian Alp, near Tübingen. 6 or 8 flutes were found in these caves, and they are about 40,000 years old. This is amazing, yes.
Yeah, amazing. So, okay, we ran through history. Now I want to focus on a little recent history about period of judges, because you found one inscription, Jerubbaal. Can you say something? Where is that found, and what is the dating and context?
Okay. There is a site called Khirbet It's located about 3 miles west of Tel Achish, the famous Tel Achish. And we started excavations there because on the surface we found pottery that characterized the early 10th century BC. And indeed, we found remains from the early 10th century BC, the time of King David. But it turned out that at this period, the site was only a small village, maybe with 3 or 4 houses, not more than that. But under the 10th century BC, we have a large town from the time of the judges, which is the second part of the 12th century and the 11th centuries BC. Okay, and we have a combination of Canaanite pottery and material culture, and also Philistine. It's a combination of Philistine and Canaanite in this site. And in a silo, we found this inscription with the name Jerubbaal. And why it's so exciting? Because Jerubbaal is also the name of Gideon. The judge Gideon that mentioned in the book of Judges was also called Jerubbaal, or in Hebrew, Yerubbaal. And this was a very interesting discovery, of course.
Great. And you mentioned Khirbet el-Rai. Can I ask you about that? Because many scholars would say it's Ziklag. Actually, you would say that. But some would doubt. So why do you think it's that identification?
Well, whenever we're excavating an ancient site, one of the questions is, what was the biblical name of this site? And not always we have answered. Or sometimes the answer is very clear, because in some cases, the Arabic name today is like the biblical name of 3,000 years ago. So in case of Khirbet el-Rai, this is a modern name, and we don't know what was the ancient name of this place. We suggested that this was biblical Tsiklag. Now, if you ask me how sure I am, I'm sure maybe 70 or 80%. It's not 100%. The question is, what do we know about Tsiklag? Now, I should say that when we suggested that Khirbet el-Rai is biblical Tsiklag, this is now the 12 suggestions. 11 suggestion has been raised before. So you can ask why we are better than all the others. Okay, and we have 3 criteria. Okay, the name, the chronology, and the geography. Okay, the name. The name Tsiklag is not Semitic. it's European, Indo-European name. Now you can see that when the Philistine came, Ashkelon remained Ashkelon, Gath remained Gath, Ekron remained Ekron, and Ashdod, Gaza, they didn't change name of places. They kept the original Canaanite name. So why suddenly a site got a name, a Philistine name? It means that it was founded by the Philistines. In other words, if you have a site, some people suggested that sites which were occupied during the Bronze Age were biblical Tsiklag. But if this was the case, the name would remain Canaanite name. So our criteria is that Tsiklag should be a site which was built by the Philistines and should not have meaningful late bronze remains before earlier in the site. So this is one criteria. The other criteria is geography. We know that Tsiklag belonged to the king of Gath, so it should be near Tel Safi, or at least half-day walk from Tel Safi, not much in much distance, because this was the Philistine settlement pattern that each city controlled about half-day walk around the city. And there's another tradition that when David went to Hebron to become a king, Tsiklag became the inherited land of the kings of Judah, which means that it has to be somewhere on the border between Philistia and Judah. It cannot be a site near Ashkelon. It cannot be a site far away in the Negev. In chronology, Tsiklag is mentioned as belong to the Philistine, so it should be from Iron 1. And then you need a level from the time of David, which would be early 10th century BC. Now, if you take these criteria, all the sites which were occupied in the late bronze are not okay. All the sites which were not occupied in Iron 1 are not okay. All the sites which was not occupied in the time of David are not suitable to be Tsiklag. And in this way, we are the only one who remain a plausible identification of biblical Tsiklag.
Thank you. But some scholars, such as Israel Finkelstein and Aaron Mayer, argue against this identification on the basis of biblical geography and the lack of continuity in names. You explained that already, but what are their arguments against geography? Do you know?
Personally, I don't know these articles by Finkelstein or by Aaron Meir. If they publish, they didn't bother to send me a copy of their publication. So maybe after the end of this discussion, you can send me the reference. I know that there were debates
I just saw
about
in the Wikipedia. I don't see their article. They just say like that. So maybe there is no article. Yeah.
Anyhow, traditionally, people thought that Tsiklag should be far away in the Negev. And they place it like in Tel Shera or Tel Sheva or even Tel Farah South or even a site near Gaza that nobody knows today where it is, by the way. But I think it's too far away. If you look at the biblical, if you look at the biblical tradition, Tsiklag need to be near Gath and near the kingdom of Judah. And Khirbet is the best candidate.
Okay, thank you so much. And is it connected to discussion about United Monarchy because significance of this site for that period?
The major contribution to this debate was our excavation in Khirbet Qeiyafa, where we found a fortified city in Judah from the time of King David. After excavating Khirbet Qeiyafa, we found the same type of pottery at Khirbet on the topsoil. So we start excavating in Khirbet and of course we have great expectation to find another city, another fortified city from the time of King David. However, you know, you don't win the lottery twice. So this is what happened. We didn't have a fortified city. We have a small village from the time of David. This is what was found in Khirbet El-Rai. But then it turned out that the stronger part in the site settlement was from the time of the judges. That this was a small town in the region.
Yes, so is it a problem for the kingdom of David? Because many would say that it was a small kingdom or he was some kind of chief or something. What do you think?
Well, you can see that this debate about King David and how much history is embedded in the Hebrew Bible has three phases. of evolution, or three paradigms that replaced each other. The first paradigm started at Copenhagen and later Sheffield and other places since then, and they claim that David is a mythological figure, that he never existed. And also Solomon never built a temple in Jerusalem. And there is a list of Rehoboam fortifications in Judah, so this list is imaginative or from other period, maybe from the time of Hezekiah, Josiah, or even John Hyrcanus. All kind of ideas has been raised about biblical traditions about the 10th century BC in Judah. And then came the Tel Dan stela. In 1993, in Tel Dan, a fragment of a stela, and a year later, two more fragments were found. And in this stela, an Aramaic king, probably Hazael, and he declares that he killed 70 kings. He killed a king from Israel and a king from the house of David. And house of David means a dynasty established by David. So only from 1993, we have a scientific proof that David indeed existed. Anyhow, it's very clear that David is not a mythological figure anymore, and this paradigm collapsed. The mythological paradigm collapsed. 3 years later came Israel Finkelstein, and he said, okay, there was David, but he was just a Bedouin sheikh living in a tent in a small village called Jerusalem. And he said the transition into urbanism and state was not in the time of David, but it was first in Judah, first in the kingdom of Israel, in the time of Omri, of the Omri dynasty, and in Israel, in Judah, Judah became a state only in the time of Hezekiah, which will be 300 years after David. What we have here is a sociological process. You have tribal community, which became urban community. And the question, if it was 1000 BC, it's the time of David. But if it was 700 BC, it's the time of Hezekiah. So this was a chronological debate when urbanism took place in the kingdom of Judah. And there was a radiocarbon project that tested 400 samples. And they came to the conclusion that urbanism started in the region in the 9th century BC. This was published in 2007. And the same year, 2007, we start excavating in Khirbet Qeiyafa. And we found a fortified city in Judah. And we sent radiocarbon dating in the year 2008. And the results were 1000 BC, the time of King David. Now you can ask, so why 400 samples show 9th century and Khirbet Qeiyafa show 10th century? I remember Finkelstein argued in one of the journals that we have 400 samples. How can you change it by few radiocarbon dating from Khirbet Qeiyafa? And I didn't answer, but my answer is it was enough. One stone was enough for David to kill Goliath. Anyhow, when you're looking at these 400 samples, they came from the kingdom of Israel, not from site in Judah. So when people dated the major urbanism in the kingdom of Israel, it was 9th century BC. But also the Bible said that the kingdom of Israel started much later than Judah. So this date has no relevance to Judah. They have relevance only to the kingdom of Israel. And people didn't understand the regional differences between North and South. So as a matter of fact, the 400 examples supporting the biblical text, not contradicting the biblical text. And people didn't understand it in the beginning. Okay, so we have a site, Khirbet Qeiyafa, a fortified city in Judah from the time of King David. So you cannot argue anymore that urbanism started in the 7th century or in the end or toward the end of the 8th century BC, because urbanism started at 1000 BC. And here came the third phase, the ethnic population at Khirbet Qeiyafa. Some people said it's Philistine. Some people said they are Canaanite. Some people said they are Israelite, belong to kings, built by King Saul. And we think that this is a Judean built by King David. And now this is the argument, who built Khirbet Qeiyafa and who lived in Khirbet Qeiyafa. Now, what is the methodology? Other people didn't have many arguments. They just said, this is Canaanite, this is Philistine, this is Israelite. But they didn't check the material culture. And our methodology is comparative analysis. We're taking aspects that were found in Khirbet Qeiyafa, and we compare them to sites in Judah, early sites in Judah, like Arad and Beersheba. And then we can compare it to Philistine site, and to site in the northern kingdom of Israel, and even to late Canaanite site. And I can tell you some of these aspects. The urban planning of Khirbet Qeiyafa. We have a Kazmat city wall. This is a city wall that has two parallel walls and rooms in between. It's not a solid city wall, but it's a hollow city wall. It's called Kazmat city wall. And we have houses, private houses. And the private houses and the city wall are combined with each other. So very unique type of urban planning. It is known today from 5 sites: Tel Natzbe near Ramallah, Bet Shemesh, Khirbet Qeiyafa, Tel Bet Mirsim, and Tel Sheva. All these 5 sites are in the kingdom of Judah. They're not in Israelite territory, not Philistine, not Canaanite. Okay, so this is one argument, the urban planning. Another argument are the animal bones. In all these cities, we have 10,000 of animal bones, but not even one pig bone. Even one pig bone was not found in Khirbet Qeiyafa in the Iron Age city. If you go to Philistine sites, you can have up to 20% of the animal bones are pigs. In Canaanite site, you can have up to 5. In Lachish, late bronze Lachish, you have 5% pig bones. So this site doesn't fit Canaanite or Philistines. Then the metal object. We have bronze object, metal object tools made from bronze and made from iron. 2/3 of the tools are made from iron and only 1/3 made from bronze. This proportion are known from Arad and Beersheba. But if you go to Philistine site and site in the kingdom of Israel, the bronze was still dominant. So you can see that the metallurgical aspect, technology, the site is Judean and not other ethnic group. On the jars, in Khirbet Qeiyafa, on the jars, there is finger impression on one of the handles, sometimes on 2 handles. Now, what is the meaning of this? You can see later in the kingdom of Judah, the jars were marked on the handles with a royal impression to the king. And later, still in the kingdom of Judah, you have handles which were impressed with a rosette symbol. And later you have lions in the Persian period and Yahud. And in the Hellenistic period, you have another type of a star with 5 points, and it's written Jerusalem, Yerushalem. Only in Judah, you have this long tradition, 800 years of stamping the handle of jars. And this tradition started at Khirbet Qeiyafa. This is for administrative purposes, because these jars was probably produced by the kingdom, given to the local farmers, and by the end of the agricultural seasons, they were collected with wheat, barley, olive oil, wine, and other agricultural products. And later, they were distributed as salaries to officials and military personnel, and so on. Now, how you control the system that there is no corruption? By marking the jars, you can control the system better. And this is typical Judean. You don't have it in Canaanite site, in Israelite site, or Philistine sites. Another aspect is religion. We excavated 60 rooms in Khirbet Qeiyafa, and we didn't find even one figurine of what we call Mother Goddess figurines. But they are common in Canaanite site and Philistine site, even site in the kingdom of Israel. But you don't have them in Judah in the 10th and 9th centuries BC. They were introduced to Judah during the 8th century BC, but not in the 10th century. So again, our site, if you look at the popular cult, it's different than Canaanite, Philistine, or Israelite site. And then the location on the Valley of Elah. It has no meaning for Philistine culture or to Canaanite culture, but this is the border of Judah. So if anybody has an interest to build a city there, it will be only the kingdom of Judah. And not surprising, in this region, the biblical tradition placed the battle between David and Goliath. David and Goliath battle is between Socho and Azekah, which are about 2 miles from each other. And Khirbet Qeiyafa is also located between Socho and Azekah. So you see that this was an important period, an important location, geopolitical location in the early days of the kingdom of Judah. That's why they built the site of Khirbet Qeiyafa in this location. This is why the battle of David and Goliath is located in this location.
Incredible arguments. Thank you so much. So we have 3 strategies from minimalists because first they say it's mythological, then we should lower chronology, and last, okay, that's not from Judah, it's Philistine. Yeah, Finkelstein would say that Khirbet Qeiyafa is associated with Philistines. So yeah.
Anyhow, I think that this is our argument. And maybe you mentioned the inscription from Khirbet el-Rai, but we found also an interesting inscription at Khirbet Qeiyafa. We have a jar which has the name Ishbaal ben Beda, Ishbaal son of Beda. And Ishbaal appear in the Bible 5 times, and most of them in the time of David. Ishbaal is the son of Saul who ruled after him. So if you combine the names that we found in El-Rai and in Qeiyafa, what do you see? In the time of the judges, you have the name Jerubbaal in the Bible and in archaeology. And in the 10th century BC, early 10th century BC, you have the name Ishbaal in archaeology and in the Bible. So the onomastic of both sources are fit with each other.
Do you know maybe an inscription that mention the name Avlates or Golates? I don't know how to pronounce. Some archaeologists. Yes. Yeah, tell us something.
Aaron Meir, in his excavation at Tel Ali in biblical Gath, he found a pottery sherd which has 6 or 7 letters on it. And as I understand it as the name Alayat. Alayat is a Greek name, but as I said, that probably Goliath is some kind of a distortion of the Greek name.
Yeah, so that name fits that period. Maybe that's not same Goliath, but would you say it's for that period corresponding?
It's more or less from the same period.
Yeah, great.
According to, it was inside on a jar, on a sherd, which has what we called irregular hand burnished, and it's characterized the 10th and 9th centuries BC. This inscription and also the Khirbet Qeiyafa inscription created a revolution in the dating of the evolution of the alphabet, because the original alphabet is what we call Proto-Canaanite or Canaanite script, and there was no standardization. So there's no standardization. You can write from left to right, from right to left, upside down, and so on. And also the letters. You can write, the stance of the letter could be different. And the question for how long this tradition lasted. And great scholar like Frank Moore Krauss from Harvard University said that this script ceased to exist in the middle of the 11th century BC. And then you start to have what you call the Phoenician or Hebrew script, which is standardized writing. And now you can see, according to Khirbet Qeiyafa and also from Tel Ali, that the Proto-Canaanite script didn't cease in the 11th century BC. It continued till maybe the middle of the 10th century BC. So this was also a revolution in understanding the transition of the alphabet from one type of script to another type of script.
Great, didn't know that. Thank you so much. And can you say something more about Khirbet Qeiyafa? What are most recent discoveries related to that city? And how would you date the chronology of that city during the time of King David? There is a controversy about that. So,
in Khirbet Qeiyafa, today we have about 28 radiocarbon dating. And they fit into the early part of the 10th century BC. So I don't think that there is any debate that it is from the time of King David. That's for sure. The city existed in the time of King David. Some people can say maybe it started a bit earlier. Some people can say maybe it's lasted few years later, but it existed as a fortified city in the time of King David. There's no debate about this. Now, Khirbet Qeiyafa was a huge revolution because we were the first one to find, you can ask how the minimalist movement started at all. And they started because there was no clear evidence about the early kingdom of Judah in archaeology. Even in Jerusalem, the part which is called City of David, but you cannot prove that even one stone is dated to the time of David. So there are problems of dating the earliest phase of the kingdom of Judah. And when we excavated Khirbet Qeiyafa, we were the first one to show what is early 10th century BC. We came with pottery and metal object and other aspects of material culture. And now if somebody excavating and finding the same remains, he knows it is in the early 10th century BC. And this is what happened, by the way, to Khirbet el-Rai. In Khirbet el-Rai, we have a level like Khirbet Qeiyafa. In this case, we have a city and village from the time of David. But this also opened the possibility to reevaluate older excavations. And now it's clear to me that there is in the site of Bet Shemesh, we have a fortified city from the time of King David, like Khirbet Qeiyafa. And there's another site called Khirbet Dawara, northeast of Jerusalem, which was excavated by Finkelstein. And now we see that it's from the early 10th century BC. The site was not correctly dated by the excavator. And we also have the site of Tel Ali, which is like Khirbet Qeiyafa. So today, if you ask me what can I say about the kingdom of David? I think that the kingdom of David was organized about not more than one day walk around Jerusalem. Khirbet Qeiyafa, Bet Shemesh are on main route going from the coastal plain into the kingdom of Judah, the valley of Elah, Khirbet Qeiyafa, the valley of Sorek, Bet Shemesh. Khirbet Dawara is another route coming from the Jordan Valley, and Khirbet and Tel Ali is the main road on the hill country. So you can see how all these sites could together, we have the territory of David. And what I think that Rehoboam, that came later, he fortified more sites in the Shfela, including Lachish. And that's why we later go to Lachish. We went to Lachish to excavate it and to see what can we say about the period of King Rehoboam. But between David and Rehoboam, we should mention Solomon. And the greatest achievement of Solomon, according to the Bible, is not conquering land, but basically constructing a palace and a temple in Jerusalem. And again, some people said it's all mythological. There was no temple in Jerusalem. The biblical tradition has no historical value. There's even a suggestion that the description of Solomon temple is the temple built by Ezra and Nehemiah by the return of Zion. So it's a temple from the Persian period. All kind of crazy idea has been suggested. In Khirbet Qeiyafa, we discovered a shrine model. Okay, a miniature building, 30 by 20 centimeters, carved in stone. And you can see that the beams of the roof organized three together. And you can see that around the entrance, you have three frames, recessed frame in the entrance in this miniature building model. But these features appearing in the biblical text about Solomon Palace and Solomon Temple, which means that the royal architecture that is described in the Bible was known in Jerusalem in the 10th century BC. So Solomon indeed could build, elaborate royal architecture, as we can see from our building model. And this is a revolutionary discovery. It was on exhibit in Bible Land Museum, Jerusalem. Then it was on exhibit in Bible Museum in Washington, D.C. Then it came back to Israel, and it was in the Israel Museum for a few years. Then it went to the Hermitage in St. Petersburg for exhibit, and now it's on exhibit in Oklahoma, in the United States, in Armstrong College. And then after a few months, it will come back to Israel and be again in the Israel Museum. So we have a fortified city in Judah from the time of David, and we have a building model which fit the biblical description of royal architecture in the time of Solomon. And you know, this model came from Khirbet Qeiyafa, not from Cyprus, not from Mesopotamia, not from Egypt. It came from Judah. And the dating, radiocarbon dating, is the early part of the 10th century BC. So this type of architecture was known in Judah in the time of Solomon. So after doing something with David and something with Solomon, who is next? Rehoboam.
Rehoboam, yeah.
And there is a biblical tradition that Rehoboam fortified 15 cities in Judah. One of them is Lachish. And we went to Tel Lachish to excavate and see if there is some historical background to this tradition. Lachish was excavated before us by 3 different expeditions. We were the 4th expedition to Lachish. The other expedition didn't find a city wall from the time of Rehoboam, but we found it in the northeast corner of the site. And we also found administrative storage building abutting the city wall. And we have radiocarbon dating. And the radiocarbon dating is not 1000 BC, like Khirbet Qeiyafa. The dating is 930 BC till 860 BC. So this is a city that was built in the time of Rehoboam and lasted for about 70 years. And then they built another level on top of it. So you can, but what is interesting about Rehoboam fortifications, that he fortified some city, Hebron and cities in the hill country. Then he fortified some cities in the Shfela, up to Lachish. But he didn't go to the Negev. He didn't fortify Arad and Beersheba, for example. So if you look at the process of urbanism in the kingdom of Judah, you can see that David started with 1 day walk around Jerusalem. Rehoboam continued 2 days walk around Jerusalem in the Shfela up to Lachish. And some kings later, 50, 60 years later, fortified Arad and Beersheba and introduced the northern Negev into the kingdom of Judah as a fortified cities. And this is, my view is, in this case, is different than all the others. Because what the minimalists say, suddenly there was a kingdom in the time of Hezekiah. What the maximalists said, suddenly there was a big kingdom in the time of David. I'm talking about a process. David started the day walk, Rehoboam 2 days walk, and later it was 3 days walk from Jerusalem. This is the way I understand that Judah has been developed over time, not suddenly.
Yes, I'm impressed. This is very accurate. So, but Israel Finkelstein would say there is so quote, there is no evidence arguing that Jerusalem, Hebron, and Khirbet Qeiyafa were the main centers of 10th century Judah. Okay, so that's from 10th century, from Monarchy, but they are not main centers. How do you comment this?
Well, in Jerusalem, it's very hard to excavate because every level built down to bedrock. This is when I'm excavating now. Today in the morning, I excavated Jerusalem, and we have Byzantine walls going down to bedrock. We have Hashmonaean remains going down to bedrock. We have Islamic remains going down to bedrock. Everyone who built in the hill country, especially in Jerusalem, cleared the earlier remains and built on bedrock. And in this situation, you don't have much remain from earlier period because they've been removed by later activities. So this is about Jerusalem. Then Hebron, Tel Rumeide, no excavation took place inside the Tel, only on the periphery. So I think that if you cannot excavate the kingdom of Judah in the hill country where it started, we should go to the Shfela, where the kingdom spread. And this is how we get these wonderful results about Khirbet Qeiyafa and about Lachish.
Yes, thank you so much. Now, can we talk about Tel Lachish? Because some people would say that the destruction line from 1150 is connected to conquest of Joshua ben Nun. So how do you view history of that city?
Let's start with the Canaanite Lachish in the Middle Bronze. We didn't excavate much from the Middle Bronze, but we found a comb. Maybe you have seen a year ago or 2 years ago in all the New York Times.
Oldest
We
Yeah.
were 6 hours on the top news in the internet of the New York Times. Because we have a comb only 3.5 centimeters, but on it we have an inscription, and this is the earliest sentence ever found in alphabet. It's about 3,800 or 3,700 BC. Complete sentence. I can tell you it's not even Hebrew, it's Canaanite. And the Canaanites say, Itash, Chat, Zi, Lekamal, Se'ar, Vezakat, which mean may this ivory root out lice from hair and beard. And this is really very, very, very funny, but it's very human. You have a comb, which its function is to remove lice, and also have an inscription on it to give it more power, to make the object more powerful. And it's interesting that it didn't say made this comb. They related to the raw material, to the ivory, because ivory came from Egypt and from Africa. So it was a very rare raw material. From the same period, we know from Jericho tombs, about 20 combs, all of them were made from wood. But this one is not wood. This is ivory, which is very, very rare object. So it was an elite, it was a prestige artifact. Another important thing about Middle Bronze Lachish is that they have a very massive fortification around the site. So far it was dated to the Iron Age, but this is actually Middle Bronze fortification system. So this is the Middle Bronze. Then we came to the Late Bronze, and in the Late Bronze we were quite lucky because we found a temple. This is the third temple uncovered in Lachish. The first temple uncovered was the Fourth Temple, not on the tail, but near the cemeteries, down the slope of the site, and this was excavated in the 1930s. Then David Osishkin, the third expedition to Lachish, uncovered another temple on the Acropolis temple, and this temple has a more Egyptian architecture and in plan. And we uncovered another temple in the northeast corner of Tel Lachish. And our temple is a typical Canaanite tower temple with 2 pillars and 2 towers in the front, and then you have the rest of the building after this facade. And in this temple, we uncovered various cultic objects, some gold, foundation deposits, Egyptian scarabs, and a Proto-Canaanite inscription, which is a very rare find, but we found an inscription also in this temple. Now, according to radiocarbon dating, this city has been destroyed. Lachish, Canaanite Lachish, has been destroyed at around 1150 BC. Now, the big question, who destroyed Lachish? The Philistine, Joshua, the people of Israel, maybe the Egyptian. Everybody, was moving around. The Egyptian, the Philistine, and the people of Israel. So, I don't know. We didn't find any inscription that said, I'm Joshua, I destroyed Lachish. So, I don't know. It's possible. You don't have much Israelite in this region, so it's possible that the Philistines who came and they established the big cities of Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, and Gath, maybe one of these cities or some of them together were fighting against the Canaanite, and maybe in one of the cases they destroyed Lachish. But I don't know.
Yeah, so it's good to be honest and know what we don't know rather than try to be dogmatic. Yeah. So okay, can we talk about Lachish also in the time of Hezekiah? Yeah, in 8th century. Do you find something about that period?
By the way, since we mentioned Lachish and Khirbet el the people should be aware that Lachish has been destroyed by the end of the Canaanite. Lachish has been destroyed. Then the site has been deserted for about 200 years, and then it was rebuilt by the time of Rehoboam. What's happened in this region during 200 years? This is where Khirbet el-Rai comes in. When Lachish was abundant, Khirbet el-Rai was the flourished. And then Khirbet el-Rai came out of use and Lachish became important city again. So in order to understand the settlement history of the region, you need to combine both Lachish and Khirbet el-Rai. Okay, Lachish was established by Rehoboam at the end of the 10th century BC, and it was a major city in Judah after Jerusalem. And it continued in the 9th century BC and all the 8th century BC. Rich, important fortification, cult object, a huge palace was built in Lachish, and other impressive administrative aspect. But in 701 BC, Hezekiah revolted against the Assyrian. He revolted around 705 BC, and in 701 BC, excuse me, so Hezekiah revolted against the Assyrian in 705 BC, and in 701 BC, 4 years later, Sennacherib, the new king of the Assyrian Empire, came to the Levant, and he conquered the Aramaic cities in the north, and then Philistine, and then Phoenician cities, and then Philistine, and then he came to Lachish, and he conquered Lachish. This is a very traumatic event that mentioned in 4 different biblical books, in the book of Kings, in the book of Chronicles, in Isaiah, and also in Micha. So very traumatic events mentioned in 4 different biblical books. But above all this, we have the Assyrian document. We have the Sennacherib document about describing the voyage to the west and how he conquered Lachish, among other places. And then we have the beautiful relief that has been uncovered by Layard in 1847 at Nineveh in the palace of Sennacherib. And today, this relief is in the British Museum. And you can see how the Assyrian army attacking the city of Lachish. You can see that they used the siege ramp to crack the city walls, and you can see the archers and the people who were standing sling stones and other soldiers. And this is a beautiful relief that showing how the Assyrian army managed to conquer Lachish. The ramp has been described by other people, by David Osiskin, who excavated it, and other people analyzed various aspects. But we did what is called chaîne de perotoire, which means how this ramp was built, where they have the raw material, how the raw material was transported, where they started to construct it, and so on. And we analyzed the possibilities, and we published a nice article in Cambridge Archaeological Journal. And we think that there was a quarry nearby, and hundreds of people were sitting day and night to break stones. This stone where there was a chain of people, and the stone moved from hand to hand. People didn't move, the stone moved, and they dumped the stones. And if you have 4 rows of people, and you dump a stone every second, then you can have in one day 160,000 stones in a day. And they need 3 million stones to complete the ramp. So it could be done in 3 weeks if they work day and night.
Oh, amazing. Thank you again. And what happened to Jerusalem? Because Sennacherib was going to conquer that city, and we have in Bible mentioned that a miracle happened, but Herodotus would say that there were mice or some epidemic or anything. So what do you think what happened?
The Assyrian has limited time. They left Assyria after the snow melted in the mountains, and there were flood. Just immediately in spring, there were flood because the snow melted in the mountain, in the Zagros and the Taurus mountains. So there were flood in the Euphrates and so on. And only after the flood, they could cross the rivers. They came and did a voyage, but they had to come back before winter, because they don't fight in winter in the ancient Near East. And I think that Sennacherib first dealt with Aramean kings and then the Phoenician and then Philistine. And by the time he came to Judah, it was really toward the end of autumn, and he was short in time. The Bible also mentions that Tirhaka, king of Egypt, came and there was a fight near El Takeh. So it's also possible that Sennacherib sent large part of his army to conquer Jerusalem, but because the Egyptian army came, all these people left to strengthen the rest of the army, and they had to fight with the Egyptian. So one way or another, I think that he has limited time, he has this disturbance by the Egyptians, and that's how Jerusalem was saved.
All right, thank you so much. I wonder how much people lived in those three cities, Lachish, Ziklag, and Jerusalem, and Khirbet Qeiyafa, sorry, in time of David, let's say.
I don't think that in Khirbet Qeiyafa you have more than like 500 people. These are small cities. And I think that the entire kingdom of David, you didn't have more than 5,000 people, maybe 6,000 or 7,000 people. And I think that in the maximum, in the time of Hezekiah, this is when Judah reaches zenith, there were maybe 20,000 people. But then after the wars with the Assyrian, the population shrunk. Some people were exiled to Assyria, people died in wars, people died from hunger, and the population shrunk. So this is the way I understand. The maximum population in Judah was not more than 20,000 people. Look at the economy. You need to look at the ecology of the kingdom of Judah. It has 4 geographical regions: the Judean desert, the hill country, the Shfela, the lowland, and the Negev. The Negev and the Judean desert are desert. They are not good for large-scale agriculture. The hill country is not good for large-scale agriculture. So the lowland, the Shfela, is the only region which was good for agriculture. So how many people could live in this area? How much calories you can produce in this area? You don't have enough, you cannot produce food for 100,000 people in the kingdom of Judah. So there were limited population. It's not like today that we have 1 million people even in one city. We're talking about small scale societies. If you look at the entire Near East, you have huge empires: Egypt, the Hittite. In Mesopotamia, you have the Assyrian, the Babylonians, and you have the Persian. Huge empire. What was Judah in the ancient Near East? It was like Liechtenstein. If you think about Europe, what is Liechtenstein in Europe? Few people and not strong economy. This is Judah. If you look, this is the way I understand Judah in the ancient Near East, like Liechtenstein in Europe. It's not Germany, it's not Italy, it's not France, it's not Britain. It's a small, small kingdom.
Yes, good analogy. Thank you so much for this. Okay, Aaron Mayer estimated that Gath was as much as 4 times the size of contemporary Jerusalem in the time of David, which casts a doubt on the claim that David's kingdom was as powerful as the Bible describes. What is your opinion on this?
Yeah, I told you that the Bible talks about David and a kingdom from Egypt to the Euphrates. I think that David's kingdom was about 1 day walk around Jerusalem. But it was a kingdom, because the minimalists said that there was no kingdom and no writing, not fortified city, no army. But in Khirbet Qeiyafa, we have administration, we have fortified city, we have fortified borders, we have writing, we have administration. So you cannot say there was nothing. But the Bible certainly exaggerated. And I tell you how I understand the process. You know these Russian babushka dolls? You have a big doll, and inside the smaller one, and inside the smaller one, and inside the smaller one.
I know, yeah.
And in the end, you have something very small. Now, when you are a king, how do you justify you being king? You said, I sit on my father's throne. So Solomon already said David was so and so important, and Rehoboam said David was so and so important, and then Hezekiah said David was so and so and so important, and then Tzidkiyahu said, or Menashe and Tzidkiyahu said David was, and over time, 400 years. The kingdom of Judah lasted 400 years. And during these 400 years, David became bigger and bigger from generation to generation. Because every king has to relate himself to the founded father. And the founded father became bigger and bigger than what he was in reality. But it doesn't mean that he didn't exist. And here came archaeology. Archaeology can help us to see what was the real dimensions of the kingdom of Judah in the time of David.
Thank you so much for this explanation. It's really visual. Yeah, so scholars claim that the books of Samuel were written around the 10th century BCE. Does archaeology shed light on that period and help us understand the level of literacy, the possible existence of prophetic or scribal schools, or the presence of any written texts from that time? Could you tell us?
Before my excavations, there were no inscription in Judah from the early 10th century BC. But thanks to our excavation in Khirbet Qeiyafa, we have two inscriptions, the famous Osrakon and the inscription of Ishbaal, son of Beda. So we have two inscriptions. Then we have another inscription later, in the later part of the 10th century, or maybe early 9th century BC, in Tel Zait, where we have the ABC written on grinding stone. And then the next inscriptions that we have are from the 8th century BC. And there's a whole gap. We don't have inscriptions in Judah from the 9th century BC. And as I'm excavating in Lachish, I'm hoping to find inscription in level 5 and level 4, and to bridge the gap from Qeiyafa to the 8th century BC. But this is because we don't have many excavations from Judahite site in the 9th century BC. Hopefully, slowly, this gap will be filled by new inscriptions.
Yes, and what do you think about Benjamin Mazar's suggestion that maybe Book of Genesis, and Gary Rendsburg would say same thing, that maybe Book of Genesis is written during the time of United Monarchy? Is it possible to write something like Genesis in that period?
I'm not a biblical scholar, and I'm not a linguistic, so I cannot say anything about when this book or another book was written. But I know one thing: every biblical book that you take, you can find scholars saying everything, that it was written during the First Temple period, or maybe during the Babylonian period, or maybe the Persian period, or maybe the Hellenistic period. You cannot find two biblical scholars that really agree on anything, which show you that this type of these suggestions that the book was written in the 7th century or 6th century or 4th century, you don't have objective criteria yet for such claims.
Yes, thank you again. And the last question, I want just to ask you about Israelite settlement, because we, according to consensus of scholars, would expect to see Israel people in about 1200 BC. So Lachish was destroyed in 1150. So what is going on? Shouldn't we expect that people settle on those cities? And
well, the key historical document for this question is the Marneptah Stela. And in the Marneptah Stela, which is dated to something like 1207, plus minus, he already mentioned a tribe called Israel in Israel. He mentioned Ashkelon, Gesher, Yenuam, which are fortified cities, and then a tribal community called Israel. So Israel was here in the land of Canaan in the end of the 13th century BC. But how early? They were 10 years before, 20 years before, 100 years before. This is the only data that we have.
Yes. So, can you give any message for the end, because we should get this interview to the end. So, any conclusion on this topic that we covered? Do you have any last word?
I think that the right scientific way to build hypotheses and to build synthesis is to say we have A, we have B, we have C, we have D. So together we can suggest a scenario. And this is what I'm doing. I'm always built my conclusions on the data that is known from excavation or historical sources. The minimalist school work differently. They said, we don't have A, we don't have B, we don't have C, so David never existed. Or we don't have A, we don't have B, we don't have C, so Solomon didn't build a temple in Jerusalem. Okay? But once you find Khirbet Qeiyafa, the whole theory collapsed. When you have the shrine model, the building model, which these architectural features from Khirbet Qeiyafa, then all these theories collapsed. So this is the major methodological lesson. Always build your theories on what you have, not on what you don't have.
Great message, Dr. Garfinkel. Thank you for sharing your invaluable insights and expertise with us today. Your work continues to illuminate and enrich tapestry of history embedded in the Holy Land, offering profound connections between archaeology and biblical narratives. So we look forward to following your future discoveries and contributions in the field. So thank you once again for joining us on the NT Podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure.
Thank you.